With President Trump meeting President Xi at Trump's Florida estate at Mar-a-Lago, the host has a lot of ground to make up, having blamed China for rigging trade rules and manipulating its currency during his campaign for the White House. Getting anywhere near to where Barack Obama was in his relationship with the Chinese leadership may need more than 2 days in sunny Florida for Donald Trump. Jeff Moore joins us now on the line from Global Risk Insights in the States. Jeff, good to talk to you. Before we get into some of the developing news headlines, of course, which to some degree I know that you're going to say is overshadowing these events, such as what's happening in Syria, what will each leader want to get out of this meeting?
I think that both of them come in to this meeting needing a win as far as the developments between these bilateral relations between the U.S. and China. I think President Trump probably has a little bit of the upper hand in that regard, just because of some of his past statements making the unpredictability of what's going to happen during these discussions kind of a heightened sense in the eyes of the Chinese. President Xi has his own political issues to concern himself with as far as bringing a win out of this meeting. They've got the reshuffle of the one-party system in China in the fall, and his status is going to be in question if he can't come out of this situation with a win, with something demonstrable to say that we've made some progress in repairing this relationship and having a nice and civil engagement to have both countries move forward in a positive way. Obviously, as you mentioned, the Syria issue kind of pops up and overshadows some of those trade discussions, but it also introduces or confirms that element of uncertainty of the Trump administration and what they're willing to do in many regards, be it naming China a currency manipulator, actually coming out with some sort of trade restrictions that would affect China. So I think that really mixes it up for the Chinese, and it probably limits the degree of a win that Xi can really bring back to China from this meeting.
I know that, I mean, Trump is certainly having to learn the rules of diplomacy here at speed. Do you see this meeting genuinely changing Donald Trump and his views of 5 months ago? Or is his drive to continue to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US going to see him revert back to type? In other words, that idea of him being a protectionist?
Yeah, well, I think that drives him, but I also think that his strategy has seemed to be one of shock and awe in the beginning, and then he usually moderates a position to the point where it seems as if he's giving up some ground and is compromising, but really is achieving an end substantially in his own interest. So we've seen this rhetoric on the campaign trail, and then in many aspects, we've not seen that rhetoric really follow through with. As I mentioned before, the currency manipulation title for China, that's not something that the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin or President Trump has really pursued since being in office. Some of these trade restrictions and tariffs that he mentioned, that's not really gone anywhere with Congress, and they've not really pushed the issue very specifically in these last few months since he's been in the White House. So I see his diplomacy is really one of that deal-making that he has prided himself on. So I imagine that they're having a very cordial meeting, and it'll be a lot more friendly than people may have anticipated based on the campaign trail. But also with some of the surrounding developments, President Xi and China and the world stage and the markets may not be exactly sure what's come out of this meeting. Trump did describe this as a first step, and the Chinese were pretty clever in getting this meeting pretty early on in the presidency, because I think they view his China policy and his policy overall as not quite developed yet. So there's going to be some nuance involved, and I think the real effects of this meeting and this developing diplomacy between the two countries is not going to be readily apparent even through this weekend. It's going to play out, and of course we're going to have to see how Trump and Xi both react when they come back, when Xi goes back to China and Trump comes out, and to really tell us about what's happened and what they view as a win. So I think it's something we'll be needing to watch closely over the next week or two.
As I said or intimated, that Trump is changing his spots quite fast, and indeed he came into the White House with this seemingly interesting relationship developing with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, for the Russians and also China, they both came out and they vetoed the sanctions that the UN wanted to impose on Syria. Now here we are with seemingly Trump now at odds now with Putin's view of Syria because of the strike overnight. Trump seems to have got an about turn on Syria. How difficult does this make it for Trump now to establish a relationship with anybody based on the fact that he seems to be shifting his position almost on a daily basis?
Yes, it was not quite even a week ago, I believe, that the Trump administration and through their UN ambassador was offering some wiggle room on the issue of Bashar al-Assad remaining in power, that his removal was not necessarily a hard condition. And then you fast forward just a little more than a week, and you've got the Trump administration striking Syria. So it definitely serves to burn some bridges, if you will, with some of these actors that we may come into conflict with as far as the United States and others in the security atmosphere. So far, the response from the Western world, from Europe, has seemed to be pretty conciliatory and supportive of the strike. There's been a lot of angst around Syria and the Assad regime and exactly how they've been running roughshod over this resistance indiscriminately. So he may gain some support in some of the more traditional kind of neoconservative Western world mindsets, while creating a little bit more uncertainty in the eyes of Russia and the eyes of China going forward. And it's interesting to me that the markets have had a really muted response to this act so far. Oil has popped up some, but the equity markets are pretty muted. There has been some flight to safety in bonds, and the biggest jump has been in gold, which may be natural when you have some situation like this develop. But it's not quite sure how that may affect some of these equity and capital market developments going forward when you've got just a mere airstrike on an airfield in Syria.
What about North Korea? This is an interesting one, isn't it? Because you've got Kim Jong-un and the North Korean leadership there lobbing bombs close to South Korea and also Japan. You've got China. I know that they're very sensitive, to what's happening in North Korea. The US, meanwhile, saying if it needs be, it'll act unilaterally on North Korea. What about the talks there between Xi and Trump with regard to the security of the immediate region around China?
Yeah, so this Syria strike really plays right into that North Korea conversation with President Xi, doesn't it? Because with the Trump administration saying over the past week or two that they've got military options on the table with General Mattis, Secretary of Defense Mattis, saying that this is unacceptable and there's no more talking really that's going to be viable anymore. That preemptive strike is there. Then with the Syria strike, it really brings it into clear relief that this is something Trump could pursue. So I think that gives him another bargaining chip at the table for the North Korea situation. It's also got some nuances to it in the relationship between North Korea and Syria. North Korea has supported and sold Syria some of its first Scud missiles. So that relationship with the weapons development programs has been there. And so there's that kind of unique connection to Syria and how it may affect this North Korea negotiating position. It also kind of gives some credence to the idea that Trump could come out just beyond any physical military actions in North Korea to try and issue some of those secondary sanctions that have been mentioned against Chinese companies that may service North Korea. So it really just opens it up for a whole mass of possibilities, and China cannot be sure exactly what Trump will be doing or will be willing to do because of the recent actions and how resolute he was on those.
Look, Jeff, we'll have to leave it there, but it's an interesting subject with an awful lot more discussion doubtless to come out of this, and of course the continuation of the meeting between the two leaders. But thanks indeed there for your time. That's Jeff Moore from Global Risk Insights in the States.